And there is this morning new reporting around a possible deal for the release of some of them. U.S. President Joe Biden says he's mildly hopeful about the negotiations.
I have been deeply involved in moving on the hostage negotiation. And I don't want to get ahead of myself here. I think the pause and that the Israelis have agreed to, it's down to, I'm getting too much detail. I know, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to stop. But I am mildly hopeful. I'm mildly hopeful.
You could hear Biden catching himself there and sounding like he's trying to reassure his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, that he wouldn't reveal too much at a news conference last night in San Francisco. In that clip, Biden says Israel is agreeing to a pause, but that is not something we've heard from the Israeli government. The U.S. is acting with Qatar and Egypt as a broker in talks between Israel and Hamas. Reports on the negotiations say the deal would include a, quote, in-place pause in the fighting, possibly as long as 5 days, something that suggests Israeli ground forces wouldn't pull out of Gaza. But the key detail reportedly involves Hamas releasing as many as 50 women and children in return for Israel's releasing an equal number of Palestinian women and children Hamas says are being held prisoner. About 240 hostages. Again, that is the number of people believed to be held by Hamas. Let's bring in Briar Stewart now, also part of our CBC News team, and Briar is in Jerusalem live with us this morning. The U.S. President, Briar, also spoke yesterday about the Israeli military raid on Al-Shifa Hospital. What is he saying about it now?
Well, that's right. He was asked specifically just about the fact that the Israeli military entered the hospital. The military says it's a targeted and precise operation in there. And that is how the U.S. president described it. Not surprising, obviously, considering that the U.S. is a strong ally of Israel. And the U.S. has been very reluctant to talk about the need for any kind of ceasefire, as we've been talking about. And so you had the IDF yesterday put out a video, which they claim showed some of the weapons and equipment with Hamas insignia that were found inside the hospital. But there hasn't been any kind of proof yet that there were tunnels under the hospital or any kind of command center, which is what, of course, the Israeli military has been saying all along, that there was some kind of a Hamas hideout underneath the hospital itself. That is something that U.S. officials have been saying, too, that their own intelligence points to that. President Biden was asked about the fact that Israel took the very extreme step of going into the hospital to the condemnation of many international aid groups. And here's what the president had to say.
You have a circumstance where the first war crime is being committed by Hamas by having their headquarters, their military, hidden under a hospital. And that's a fact. That's what's happened. Israel did not go in with large number of troops, did not raid, did not rush everything down.
So we understand that the Israeli military is still at Al-Shifa, but of course, I mean, the offensive is playing out throughout Gaza. And overnight, there are reports that the Israeli military released pamphlets from aircraft, as they do, to warn civilians about impending military action. And they dropped leaflets in neighborhoods in the eastern part of Han Yunis. Now, that is a city in the southern part of the Strip. They were telling people in the eastern neighborhoods to move to shelters because they were going to start military operations. We know that there have been a number of airstrikes in those areas in recent days. And I can tell you that the UN Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, just spoke to the media during his visit to the Middle East. And I want to read a quote that he gave while talking about the situation. And what he said is, "The killing of so many civilians cannot be dismissed as collateral damage. The only winner of this war is likely to be extremism." And he echoed what the UN Security Council voted for last night, that there needs to be a multi-day pause and that all the hostages need to be released.
Briar, this raid on the hospital, it is further inflaming tensions in the region as well. What are you seeing and hearing this morning?
Well, it is. And I mean, tensions have been building for quite some time. And I would say that the level of violence and clashes had been building well before October 7th. And since then, it's only increased. And this morning, there was a gunfire that erupted at a checkpoint between Jerusalem and the Palestinian or the West Bank city of Bethlehem. And at that checkpoint, there were a number of Israelis were killed, about 6. They were taken to the hospital. And so details about that are still coming out, but it's just kind of one incident. And we get alerts, news alerts all throughout the day about various clashes between Israeli forces or Israeli settlers and Palestinians in the West Bank. And it really is a very tense situation. And I think the fear is that as things continue and the violence in Gaza continues, it could flare up elsewhere.
Briar, thank you very much. Again this morning, Briar Stewart live in Jerusalem. New video into us this morning from Israel's military showing the fighting in Gaza. It is edited, putting together images from several days. It's important you know that. Israel's military says ground forces now control Gaza harbor. There's no independent verification of the claim right now, but in a post on social media, Israel's military also says ground forces destroyed 10 tunnels used by Hamas. And with us this morning is one of the world's foremost experts in tunnel warfare, subterranean warfare. Daphne Richmond Barak is with me as we talk about this, and she is a subterranean war expert with Reichman University and the founder of the International Working Group on Subterranean Warfare. She's in Herzliya, Israel this morning. Welcome to our program. I'm delighted to have some time with you.
Thank you.
You have said in a recent interview elsewhere, Hamas has perfected the art of tunnel warfare. I'd like to start there. If you could explain its strategy and the advantage tunnels provide.
Sure. Hamas is a terrorist group, and it has purposefully chosen to set up its entire military infrastructure beneath schools and mosques and civilian dwellings and hospitals. This is part of a strategy that is decades long. We're talking almost 2 decades. And the reason why I say that Hamas has perfected this art is because it has integrated more and more, increasingly over this decade and a half, subterranean warfare into its strategy. It began with smuggling tunnels between Gaza and Egypt. And then these particular tunnel smugglings were then used for kidnapping IDF soldiers. But Hamas has also dug cross-border tunnels whose purpose is to infiltrate Israeli territory, either by land or by sea, actually. So we also see land-to-sea tunnels. So a whole variety of uses, right, incorporated into this broad strategy to operate undetected and ultimately also neutralize the capabilities, the sophisticated and technological capabilities of the IDF.
So Israel's stated goal from this war is to eradicate or decapitate Hamas. For Israel to accomplish that, how important then are these tunnels?
So the tunnels, the subterranean infrastructure, which is made of tunnels and subterranean passageways of different types and different depths and different, again, they serve different purposes. This is like the oxygen of Hamas, because if Hamas has to operate from the ground up, from above the surface, then it will be detected, and the intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities of Israel will be able to know what they're planning and where they're going, and so really this is like the oxygen of the group. So I believe that while it's important to eliminate the leadership of the group, of the terrorist group Hamas, I feel like for the long-term security of the state of Israel, right, to eliminate the threat, to make sure that no other operation can be planned undetected, far away from the eyes of Israel's army, destroying this infrastructure is truly a key objective.
A key objective to destroy it. But we've known, it's widely accepted, this network is so vast, as you've said, under everything, some 500 kilometers of network of tunnels is what the figure I have heard. How does Israel do that then to destroy it? What are its possible methods?
So first of all, let's go back to is it possible to even know what is the scope of this immense network of tunnels, right? How many levels and where it goes and how does it crisscross under the Gaza Strip? I think this is also a key question, and Israel has been struggling with the elimination of that network. We can see from the latest 2 operations in 2014, Operation Protective Edge, and Operation Guardian of the Walls in May 2021, Israel inflicted a blow to this infrastructure that we're discussing now. But it was more in terms of like neutralizing or, exploding some tunnel entrances and exits and access points. There was not really a challenge that Hamas could not overcome, and it did overcome it, and it did expand this infrastructure over time. Now, many states have faced subterranean threats, as you're suggesting, and how do they deal with it? I think it's good to look back at history and see what happened. So NATO, and Canada was part of this, was in Libya, and Gaddafi was using tunnels. Al-Baghdadi from ISIS was using tunnels, and ISIS used tunnels in Syria and Iraq extensively. So what has been done? Well, in general, states have deployed their most powerful weapons in order to deal with subterranean threats. And that's because this threat is invisible and unpredictable, and so states really have little choice but to go for the most powerful solution and make sure that they are eliminating the infrastructure. So we see aerial strikes for the most part.
But then, as far as I understand, again, not at all an expert in your area of study and knowledge, but even things like dogs and robots are employed as well, are they not?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. They're employed, though, at a different stage of I would say, the operation, right? To kind of detect the tunnels, to map them. That would be for the robots and the drones, but also to clear them. The dogs can be used to make sure there are no explosives in the tunnels, there are not booby traps, that maybe chemical substances are not present. It's a way to kind of ensure that it's a method of force protection to make sure that if and when you do have to send your forces inside tunnels, which should be a measure of last resort, then they are protected as much as possible from a lot of booby traps and a lot of dangers that can happen inside the tunnel.
I have questions about subterranean warfare in general, but I do want to get to a couple of questions about things we're talking today. And we'll show you some video of this. The fighting at Al-Shifa, which is the largest hospital in Gaza, that has become such a focal point this week, Professor, and Israel has received international condemnation for the fighting that has been going down on that compound property. Israel showing video today that says it has proof that Al-Shifa is a command center, a military hideout for Hamas. What is your assessment of the video that we've seen thus far? Again, we can't independently verify it. What do you think of it?
Look, I completely understand the concern. We're talking about the objects that are the most protected under international humanitarian law, which I happen to actually know quite well. And so there's something it's a reality, very difficult to accept, I think, for all of us, that hospitals would be used, to serve as weapons caches, as logistical centers, as places to hold hostages. I mean, this is very disturbing. But when you bring it back into the context of a terrorist organization that is threatening its own population first and foremost, right, by having all this equipment inside hospitals, then it kind of helps, I think, to make sense of it. And Israel has been definitely, we see the idea of building a case, I think you're right, over the past 2 weeks, showing evidence about what is going on inside the hospital, even though it's been, the Al-Shifa story, I have to make that clear, is definitely not a new story. It has been, for over 10 years, we've known about what's going on in Al-Shifa Hospital, but Israel never did anything about it, right? Not in 2014 again, and not in 2021. And so really this became the most protected place to be, right? So Hamas exploited that. And then when we see now, it's difficult to assess at the moment. I'll tell you why. It's an operation that's very much ongoing. It started really yesterday, the actual actions there. So I think we need to figure out what else is going on. Also, Israel gave a lot of advance warning about the fact that it was going to come into the hospital and where it was going to come in and from what side and what it was going to do there. So it's possible, right now it looks abandoned and almost kind of, impossible to use. But don't forget, since the infrastructure is there and it could be used again. And I think it does show the abuse of the protection of medical facilities And I believe we have to wait a little bit more for the IDF to expose more of what's going on there and more of the network.
Just a quick point, and this is not a quick issue at all. This will be the subject of lengthy investigation and discussion, but you said you have a knowledge of that, and indeed head of the International Law Desk at Reichman at the Institute for Counterterrorism. So in terms of the application of international humanitarian law, you have said publicly that it looks to you that there are violations on both sides. Can you just explain that as we leave this conversation today?
I don't know, in what context I've said that, so it's difficult to say. But right now, what I can tell you is that the immunity that hospitals enjoy under the law of war is very strong. It's some of the strongest. Like I said, they're the most protected sites. But that immunity is not absolute, and it can be lost if that particular civilian site is being used to make a contribution to military action. And so once that immunity is lost, the hospital, even if it's simultaneously used for civilian purposes as a medical facility, can turn into a legitimate target. And then it's a question of proportionality, advance warning, what kind of operation you do there, how much you've evacuated, and so precautions that will be taken to minimize civilian harm. So as you said, as investigations will be looking at these are some of the elements they'll be looking at.
Not violations. I should have said obligations. Both sides have obligations here under the laws of humanitarian laws of war applying to both sides. And as you suggest, further conversations and investigations on those points to come. Thank you so much for the time today. I hope we'll have another conversation again. Daphne Richmond Barak in Herzliya, Israel today.